In an incredible moment at my son's grave, my twins heard shocking words. He disappears with. Sarah knelt in the fallen leaves, their golden hues stirring memories of laughter and warmth. A chill danced through her spine as Alex and Mia exchanged wide-eyed glances, their innocence clashing with the rawness of grief permeating the air. This grave, their first true encounter with death, loomed in stark contrast to picnics beneath the same oak, sugary laughter echoing in the breeze. Each word the twins uttered seemed to scratch at her heart, exposing the tender wounds she desperately tried to conceal. "Where did he go?" they pressed, their little voices a soft chorus of confusion. She hesitated, the weight of her truth hanging heavily within her. How could she explain the unexplainable? How could she shield them from the harsher realities of life while grappling with her own monstrous agony? He with the stars? The words felt inadequate, a weak placeholder for a graver truth. Her resolve faltered as she met their bright, searching eyes. They deserved clarity, but all she possessed was uncertainty, an aching void she feared would swallow her whole. As days slipped by, a strange compulsion swept over Sarah. She found herself rummaging through boxes that housed fragments of Ethan's life drawings, report cards, and now, unfinished poetry, a treasured collection that hinted at his deeper thoughts. The words danced on the page, revealing dreams of safer roads, of sunsets seen through unashamed eyes. A fire sparked in her heart, igniting a fierce need to honor her son's legacy, to make a difference where he could not. Yet the thought terrified her. Could she face the townsfolk, the very community she had once believed stood unified? The fear of confrontation rooted her feet to the ground, paralyzing her resolve. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The weight of grief felt like chains, pulling her back into a familiar darkness. The whispers from her children echoed in her mind, the unsettling reminder of their innocent yet perceptive nature, clinging to something profound. What did they sense? What truth lay behind their puzzling words? The unshakable bond of loss and longing gnawed at Sarah, as she prepared for a town hall meeting that could either be a launch pad or a burial ground for her hopes. She could see the scene vividly, faces familiar yet strangers arrayed in judgment. Would they listen? Would they understand? Could she truly seek justice in a world that had let her down? Anxiety spiraled, creating a storm in her chest, and each breath drew her closer to the edge of despair. She could envision Ethan's longing gaze urging her forward, a bittersweet pushing force recognizing her need for closure, but she felt vulnerable and unshackled. Justice felt so distant, yet so tantalizingly close, like the morning sun struggling to pierce through thick fog, and in that moment of soul-crushing uncertainty, she asked herself the hardest question of all: in hunting for justice, would she lose her own sense of peace? The emotional pressure was a turbulence she could no longer ignore. The whispers of her twins haunted her, and the ultimatum of confronting her fears hovered above her like a guillotine, unrelenting. As she clutched Ethan's poetry tightly, the resolve to share his words both intimidated and inspired her, the dance of life and loss intertwining, aching desperately for resolution that felt irrevocably out of reach. In the days trailing her visit to Ethan's grave, Sarah felt the reverberation of her twins' innocent question gnawing at her. The weight of her inaction piled high like the autumn leaves scattering around her yard, a constant reminder of what remained unfulfilled. Would she continue to hide behind a veil of silence, or would she finally confront the shadows that dared to consume her? Determination took root, emboldening her with resolve. She spent long evenings pacing her dimly lit living room, reciting her thoughts aloud. The poems lay sprawled on the coffee table, their ink a reflection of a painful vulnerability she had yet to embrace. Each line bore Ethan's soul, his hopes entangled in the hollow echoes of loss. It was all she had left of him, an oracle that demanded to be heard. The thought of presenting his words at the town hall meeting ignited a fire within her, one that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Could these words work as a bridge, connecting her pain to the understanding of the people who once surrounded her? The twins' curious eyes lingered in her mind, nudging her forward into this daunting plan. They needed to know that even in darkness, the possibility of light existed. As the meeting day approached, anxiety danced like static electricity throughout her body. Daring to imagine the scene, she envisioned standing at the podium, a beacon of heartache surrounded by the same familiar faces that had previously offered their support. Would the grief-stricken mother unveil her vulnerability, or would she feel the pull of silence, as heavy as before? Each morning, Sarah retraced her steps, rehearsing her narrative how she would honor Ethan, but also demand awareness of the circumstances surrounding his departure. The flicker of fear remained, a ghost trailing her thoughts, but it battled with a blooming sense of purpose. This meeting was an opportunity for herself, and for Ethan, a chance to be heard even in absence. Each utterance of his words would meld her voice with his, a symbiotic reclamation of all that had been shattered. Mornings were marked with preparations, selecting the right outfit, crafting notes, composing herself in front of the bathroom mirror, where she searched for the reflection of a woman resilient enough to navigate this tumultuous task. Yet, when each moment arrived, an internal battle raged within her. It was during one of those routine sessions that an increasing sense of clarity washed over her. Beyond the podium, she envisioned a moment of authenticity, raw and unfiltered, the catharsis of sharing not only her journey through grief, but also the unyielding love she felt for her son. For the first time, the idea of vulnerability transformed from a weakness into a strength. With each passing hour, the urgency spiked. The dread of the impending meeting intermingled with a newfound anticipation. This was her moment to confront her own shadows. The environment around her, once wrapped in solemn darkness, began to brighten within her mind, an event horizon signaling the potential for rebirth and healing. The night before the meeting, she gathered her twins and whispered to them about courage, about the acceptance of pain, and how their brother would be remembered through her efforts. They exchanged small nods, their innocent acknowledgement wrapping her in a warm embrace of familial support. In their eyes, she could see it, a mirror reflecting her growing determination. As she lay down that night, sleep evaded her. Instead, vivid images of the meeting swirled in her mind, flickering between hope and terror. But somewhere within the churn of anxiety, a single thought crystallized, one that filled her with a sense of urgency. This was not just for her but for her children and for Ethan. When dawn finally broke, it brought with it the pivotal moment she had been preparing for. The sun stood still in her heart, burning bright with a truth waiting to be untangled. She slipped into her dress, her pulse a cadence of anticipation. The time to face the quiet judgments, the muted stares, and to resist the suffocating silence had arrived. With the parchment of Ethan's poetry tucked into her hands, she took a deep breath and stepped toward a future defined by her resolve. The meeting loomed, and she was ready to discover if her fears would transform into a powerful voice, one that was finally unafraid to assert itself. The door of the town hall awaited her, but what lay beyond it? Would she reclaim her narrative, or was the release of her vulnerability destined to ignite a backlash she wasn't prepared for? The door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the hall, magnifying her heart's heavy beats. A murmur rippled through the crowd as she stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the familiar faces. Each was a fragment of her past, both supportive and judgmental. They wore expressions of curiosity, concern, or indifference that intensified her internal tumult. The weight of their eyes felt like a storm pressing down, demanding she either sink or soar. Taking measured strides toward the podium, Sarah fought to control the tremble in her hands. The notes crinkled as she clutched them, a tangible reminder of the words she was about to unleash. With every step, the dichotomy of vulnerability and strength waged war within her. When she reached the microphone, the faces before her blurred momentarily, and the world around her faded. Time stood still as her thoughts pivoted between doubt and determination. What if they laughed? What if they turned away? A flicker of panic threatened to engulf her, but she steadied her breath and focused. Ethan's voice echoed in her heart, urging her to release the burdens she carried. "Thank you for being here today," she said, her voice wavering slightly as it spilled into the air. The outpour of warmth from her twins behind her enveloped her, reminding her of the reason she stood before the gathering. "I'm here not just as a mother but as a voice for my son. Voices hold power, and silence is a thief." The murmurs quieted, and for a moment, Sarah felt as if the audience was suspended in a breath with her. She unfolded the sheets of poetry, allowing them to drape the podium like a protective cloak. The words, alive and potent, had slumbered for too long. Her mind raced as she started reading. With each stanza, she voyaged deeper into a landscape painted with grief, love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. She felt the tumult of emotions surge, the lines vibrating as if they had a heartbeat. Instinctively, she began to weave Ethan's story into her own, a muscle memory honed by Chris's absence. The poem spoke not just of loss but of the vibrant life Ethan radiated, the dreams he held, and ultimately, the unjust tragedy of his departure. A subtle strength grew from within her, and instead of shrinking from the raw nature of her pain, she embraced it. As she spoke, she caught glimpses of understanding in the eyes of the audience. She observed nods, whispers of empathy exchanged, and the shifting weight of judgment. Vulnerability transformed into a shared burden rather than an isolated struggle. But just as she found her rhythm, a voice unexpectedly pierced the moment, saturating it with tension. "What do you expect us to do with this?" A man from the back slashed through her words, his tone mocking yet tinged with confusion. This was her confrontation, the reflection of all her fears and what had held her captive for too long. "I expect you to listen," she replied firmly, a fire igniting in her belly. "To understand that pain can't be ignored. To recognize that silence doesn't bring solace but perpetuates suffering." His brow furrowed, surprise flashing across his features. A murmur of agreement sparked among others, but Sarah pressed on, feeling the truth harden her resolve. "Ethan deserves to be remembered, not as a casualty but as a spark that can ignite awareness and change," she declared. The energy in the room shifted, a collective tide turning toward her. The moment expanded beyond her personal experience, blossoming into a shared space of vulnerability against the stigma surrounding loss. As she concluded her reading, applause erupted, ringing in her ears like the sweetest of music. Yet, a part of her remained tethered to the confrontation. Had she truly reached them? Did her words pierce the veil of apathy? The applause continued, but Sarah's focus sharpened on the man who had challenged her. He was still seated, his expression unreadable, almost contemplative. Will this simply be noise, or will it inspire action? She questioned in a heartbeat of uncertainty, the adrenaline still working through her. In that moment, she understood that this was only the beginning. The room might have felt warmer, but the path ahead was fraught with obstacles. The vulnerability she embraced could just as easily dissolve in the face of resistance. As she stepped down, she realized that the seeds she had sown today weren't solely for her own healing but also for a community teetering on the brink of acknowledgement. What next, she wondered, would ripple from this pivotal act of courage? Outside, beyond the town hall's doors, the true confrontation awaited her. Would they rally around the truth, or would her words only echo back in indifference? The question loomed like an unturned page, unveiling a brand new chapter of her journey. As Sarah stepped outside, the bright glare of the sun felt jarring against the emotional shadow that enveloped her from within. She blinked hard, the applause still resonating in her ears, though the warmth of recognition quickly faded into a fragile uncertainty. What she had shared was a fracture of her life, a tangible slice of grief laid bare for the world to witness. And yet, the immediate aftermath cast shadows of self-doubt like a cold breeze. Her twins clung to her sides, their small hands offering comfort, grounding her in the moment. She focused on their innocent laughter, the joy that erupted with every nudge from the crowd. It was precious, it was a spark. Yet, beneath that warmth simmered the chilling realization of vulnerability. Would this newfound courage sustain her? Or would she return to the narrow confines of her fears? As they made their way to the parking lot, the earlier confrontation replayed in her mind. Would the man's challenge linger, haunting her resolve? She had expected resistance, but the question still echoed painfully. Would her words simply dissolve into noise? She needed to confront that fear to forge meaning from her experience rather than remain trapped in its aftermath. The car felt like a vessel of safety, a space where the walls could absorb her thoughts without judgment. "How did it feel, Mom?" Her daughter's question was innocent but struck her like a revelation. Sarah's gaze flicked over to their faces, radiating hope and curiosity. "It felt vulnerable," she finally responded, swallowing the remnants of doubt threatening to rise. "Like laying bare everything I've been carrying." Her son squeezed her hand and whispered, you were strong. You let us share Ethan's story. People heard you. For the first time that day, a genuine smile unfurled across her lips. Their faith reignited something deep within her. It wasn't just about the audience, it was about the conversation her family could now have. Yes, she affirmed, that strength is now part of our family. But uncertainty continued to linger like an unwelcome guest. What would she do next? Her heart soared with desire to use this newfound voice, but where would that lead her? Why not plan something more than her own healing? Could she confront that man, the embodiment of all her doubts, in a way that might affect change? As the inevitable thoughts began to congeal, her eyes settled on the horizon, a mix of worry and determination intertwining. She had voiced a truth today, but the challenge remained before her: how to take these first fragile steps into tangible action. The idea bloomed slowly, tracing its roots in the coalition of loss and awareness. What if she initiated conversations about loss, transforming vulnerability into community dialogue? This could be a foundation, a launchpad. Sharing pain could evolve into a shared mission for healing. And as it had become apparent today, that mission was a necessity, but would others join her? The specter of her earlier confrontation whispered a warning: the pull of indifference would always threaten to hold them back. The moment she had faced the man, an embodiment of her fears etched the pivotal question into her mind: what will it take for others to join this journey? As they drove toward home, Sarah's resolve solidified. She would not shy away from that confrontation, rather, she would prepare for it. The plan emerged in fragments: blog posts, community meetings, maybe even workshops. The more she thought of it, the more excited she became, realizing that painting the conversation around grief might bring others like her to the surface. Before long, they were home, but Sarah's mind was far from settled. She felt a pulse of action surging through her. It was time to transform those seeds she had planted today into something meaningful. Outside the car, her heart raced with the unfamiliar thrill of purpose, yet, in the back of her mind, the shadow of the man lingered, the question of his skepticism twisting like a thorn. What if he was right? What if her efforts fell flat? The battle for acknowledgement had only begun, and one fleeting confrontation had sparked a flame of determination within her, one she couldn't ignore. As the twins bounded into the house, their laughter filling the silence, Sarah stayed behind, staring at the door she had just closed. The journey ahead was daunting, funneled through the uncertainty of her intentions, yet illuminated by the possibility of hope. In that moment, a crash of determination solidified her next step. It was clear this was not merely an exploration. It was a reclamation. The time had come to craft her voice not just for Ethan but for others too, to confront the man who had questioned her, to prove not just to him but to herself that silence could indeed be shattered. Her heart raced in anticipation as she stepped inside, brushing off the drop of anxiety, whispering caution. The moment had arrived to truly embrace the fight ahead. But lingering questions remained in her mind. How would she confront the skepticism she expected? What tangible actions would solidify her new direction? As the evening settled, brimming with possibility, the urge to act surged forward, but would it be enough to break the silence where it mattered most? A week passed, filled with moments that both inspired and challenged Sarah. The air was infused with the scent of fall leaves, yet she felt the chill of uncertainty in every decision looming ahead. Each morning held the same solemn rhythm, but a flicker of hope danced in her chest, urging her forward. While her twins were at school, Sarah carved time for research. She spent hours online, exploring blogs and podcasts about grief and healing. Other voices resonated with her, revealing their battles and triumphs, a melody of shared narratives that provided solace. Yet, hidden within those stories, she uncovered the stark reality of the stigma surrounding loss, the silence that too often shrouded grief. With every article, her resolve solidified, mingling with the wisdom of those who had walked similar paths. Invoking spontaneity, Sarah crafted her first blog entry, pouring her soul onto the screen. Titled "The Weight of Silence Grief," it was raw and honest, touching on the isolation she felt in her sorrow. With each keystroke, she confronted the notion that perhaps, just maybe, others needed to hear this too. She hesitated before hitting publish, an internal war raging. What if her words fell into a void? Yet, a voice deep inside proclaimed, what if they don't? That fear propelled her fingers to press the button, unleashing her vulnerability into the digital abyss. The response was immediate and electrifying. Comments cascaded in, each one a thread of connection, an invitation to dialogue. Among them, a few stood out, stories of individuals grappling with their own losses, expressing gratitude for her honesty. Their kind words unraveled a conflicting mix of emotions, gratitude and a weight of responsibility. This was the kind of dialogue she envisioned, yet it now carried a gravity she hadn't anticipated. As she glanced at her phone, a notification popped up, a comment from an anonymous user. "Your words resonate, but what makes you think they matter, really?" The familiar sting of that man's skepticism crept back, igniting a defensive spark within her. Hadn't others been asking the same question? Sarah recognized the need for her to prepare for that confrontation, not just the hypothetical one with him, but also with that question within herself. What if I fail? The doubt echoed in her mind, mirroring a broader theme. Would she truly make a difference if she continued down this path? Weeks turned into a month, and her blog transitioned from personal reflection into a small community of shared grief. Each story shared became catalytic, igniting collective healing. Yet, the load of her growth was becoming palpable. Laying oneself bare gave rise to unforeseen challenges. The deeper she delved into her own narrative, the more she realized how unprepared she was to handle the stories of others who were just beginning to confront similar truths. A decision crystallized slowly. Sarah would host a meetup at a local cafe, an open invitation to share experiences of loss. It tugged at her anxiety. What if no one came? What if it became too raw? The fear of silence threatened to eclipse her ambition, but as she envisioned the possibility of women and men gathering, a collective sharing of pain and hope, that glimpse of light overpowered the rising tide of fear. The writing on her blog had laid the groundwork, and now it was time to lay the groundwork for something tangible. The night before the meetup arrived, her heart raced as she stared at the empty space on her calendar. Would this be her moment of reclamation? Would she step into that vulnerable space and lead the conversation? Closing her eyes, Sarah envisioned the faces of her twins, reminding her of the strength she had found in sharing Ethan's story. Confidence coursed through her veins, yet the skepticism of that single man whispered in her ear. Shadows loomed large. She needed to prepare for the weight of expectation in the air, her own doubts, and the skepticism she expected from others. As the morning light streamed through her window, illuminating the potential ahead, a new strength swelled within her. She was not only navigating her grief, she was leading herself toward a collective journey. And as her thoughts settled, the words echoed once more. What if I fail? A small smile crossed her face. What if I fly? Stepping out into the daylight, the warmth kissed her skin. It was time to shift the narrative once more, to face the looming backlash of uncertainty head-on. And the question flickered anew in her mind. How would she confront the man who questioned her conviction when the time came? Her heart pounded in alignment with the rising fire of action, eager to transform those questions into strength. The clock ticked on. The hour of truth approached, but as she prepared, another thought emerged. Was she ready to become the voice that echoed in the silence? As the day of the meetup dawned, Sarah felt the air around her thrum with a mix of excitement and dread. She made her way to the cafe, each step punctuated by a crescendo of hopes and fears crashing against her resolve. The sunbeams spilled onto the pathway, illuminating the path ahead, yet shadows lurked at the edges of her vision, reminding her of her vulnerabilities. Arriving early, she staked out a small table in the corner, nervous energy swirling inside her like a restless storm. The cafe, with its warm aromas and coffee buzz, felt alive, yet she couldn't shake the isolation that cloaked her heart. Would anyone show up? What if her story of loss failed to resonate with others? Her internal dialogue spun, questioning whether the roots of their shared grief could actually reach the light. As patrons trickled in, she busied herself with arranging chairs, but her mind was far from the mundane task. The unsettling comment from the anonymous user nagged at her, feeding a thread of doubt that entwined itself around her pulse. What if her effort to connect turned into an anticlimax? What if her own story of grief didn't hold the weight she hoped it would? The clock's hands whirled, and at last, the first participant arrived, a woman named Lisa, her eyes red-rimmed yet steadfast. "I saw your blog," she said, her voice tinged with both gratitude and sorrow. "I didn't think I could speak about my loss, but I needed to be here." In that moment, Sarah felt her heartbeat accelerate with a flickering sense of purpose. Perhaps this was the connection she had yearned for, a tangible exchange that extended beyond her computer screen. As more faces filled the seats, she sensed an unspoken agreement forming in the room. The air shifted, it grew heavy with shared experiences, yet uniquely light as vulnerability unfolded. One by one, stories emerged, tales of love lost, of dreams never realized, and of the moments so visceral they could draw tears from stone. Each narrative carried its own sorrow yet became part of a greater narrative of healing. Yet, just as Sarah began to feel the buoyancy of mutual understanding, she was thrust back into familiar doubt. Someone shifted in their seat, and with an apprehensive lull, the question arose: and what if it doesn't get better? The room, once filled with warmth, grew momentarily silent, eyes darting towards Sarah as if she held their collective fate. In that charged stillness, reality struck. This was the moment she had both anticipated and dreaded. "I don't have an answer," she confessed, her voice steady despite the tremors inside. "That's the essence of grief. It's messy, it's unpredictable. But I believe we owe it to ourselves to face it, to find our way together, even when it feels heavy." The words flew from her mouth like an unshackling of her own embedded fears, exposing her raw truth to the group. Tentatively, discussions spiraled into deeper territories: questions surrounding healing, the judgment they faced from the world, and their fears about being misunderstood. Sarah had expected a neutral response, but instead, a sisterhood of shared loss converged, and for the first time, she felt less alone. It was not just a meetup, it was a gathering of souls seeking connection in a world often swallowed by silence. Yet, as revelations unfurled, shadows wouldn't fully dissipate. Another voice piped in tentatively: "What about those who don't understand? What if they think we're just wallowing in sorrow?" The skepticism embedded in their gaze pierced through her newfound confidence, echoing her own doubts like the residual sting from the comment that had haunted her. Sarah took a breath, feeling the weight of their collective concern. It was an unflinching reminder that healing was not linear, it required constant courage in the face of external judgment. "We create our own narrative," Sarah responded, her tone firm yet compassionate. "What we share is ours to define, not theirs to judge. We hold the power in our stories." Outside, the sun began to set, the warmth dipping into a cool embrace as she looked around the room filled with people who had breathed life into her struggle. The conversation shifted from doubts to empowerment. They began to speak of resilience, echoing each other's strength as if forming what had once felt like an impossible pact. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah experienced a strange, electric determination surge within. She would not allow doubt to consume her narrative. These connections mattered, they were stones placed along a pathway toward healing, but even as hope surged, an unfamiliar sensation twisted in her gut. A sudden recollection of that anonymous comment hovered ominously in her mind. It nagged at her even as the meeting ended on a note of soaring positivity. Would she have the courage to confront that question once and for all, not just within herself but with those who doubted her? The night was still young, filled with questions that churned in her heart, and one stood out starkly: how would she confront the skepticism that, like a shadow, trailed behind her? Sarah stood at the threshold of a new day, sunlight spilling through her window, illuminating the remnants of unease still murmuring within her. She had shared her thoughts, wrestled with uncertainties, and carved out a sacred space for others to do the same, yet the shadow of that anonymous comment lurked ominously at the back of her mind. It was an uninvited guest that sent her spiraling back into doubt. With the soft chirp of birds outside, she set her day's intentions, reciting affirmations that felt increasingly hollow as she confronted the raw truth. Self-doubt could be as infectious as grief itself. She had been a vessel for others' stories, yet why did her own inclination to confront the skeptic seem so formidable? She wondered if perhaps she had skirted around the very doubts that could be her saving grace in facing her fears. Deciding not to let the day slip away, Sarah grabbed her jacket and stepped outside. The world felt crisp, invigorating, and as she walked, a plan began to form. She would not shy away from the comment that had plagued her. Instead, she would embrace it, challenge it, and emerge fortified. Today, she would return to the cafe, but this time, she would begin the conversation that had weighed on her heart since the meetup. Reaching the cafe, Sarah noticed the lingering scent of brewed coffee intertwined with the sweet notes of pastries. The usual safety she derived from the familiar environment dissolved into a pang of apprehension. Maybe today would be different. With resolve, she opened the door, stepped inside, and was met with a wave of recognition from the barista. It was warm and inviting, yet the self-imposed pressure rattled her senses. She chose her same corner table, but instead of arranging chairs, she took a breath and crafted a list of thoughts. What if she could create a space not just for shared stories but also for confronting fears? Gathering her nerves, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to the group. Let us talk about the skepticism. Let us not avoid what scares us. As her fingers hovered over the keyboard, she hesitated. Self-doubt coiled around her anticipation. Would they be willing to engage in an unvarnished discussion, or would this provoke them to pull back into silence? The memory of their shared warmth from the previous meeting held a glimmer of hope, but fear often overshadowed bravery. Taking a deep breath, she hit send and waited, anxiety thrumming through her like an erratic heartbeat. Surprisingly, the responses arrived quickly. Affirmations surged through the screen. Yes, they were willing to confront it together. In her yearning for growth, bonding with this newfound group had illuminated another layer of her emotional landscape, where courage could thrive amidst the debris of grief. As familiar faces began to filter in, she felt the tremors of anxiety, but, intertwined, there was also a burgeoning sense of community. They found their spots, and with quick nods of recognition, Sarah sensed that they, too, carried skepticism like a worn cloak. Thank you for coming back, she began, her voice steadier than she had imagined it would be. We've explored our stories of grief, but what about the judgments we face? Let us lean into that today. Their reactions varied, some nodding in agreement, while others shifted in their seats, unsure of what lay ahead. She could see the flickers of apprehension mirrored in their eyes, but among them was the spark of determination. Sarah invited them to share how their experiences had been colored by outside opinions and silent expectations. The discussion grew electric, invigorated by the vulnerability her invitation had coaxed forth. As they shared their stories of judgment, Sarah discovered the capacity within herself to confront the concept directly. With each voice that rose, the community complex grew richer, more intricate, like threads weaving a tapestry of pain and resilience. Yet, amid the shared dialogues, Sarah felt the question still looming, an unsettling specter. As they took turns sharing their thoughts, she pondered how to either dispel or trap the lingering shadow of doubt that had haunted her. Then, amid the crescendo of voices, Lisa stood up, a fierce resolve illuminating her features. What if we turned skepticism into strength? What if we used those doubts to ignite our journey instead of extinguishing it? Sarah's eyes widened. Could it be that existential doubt, when confronted, might become an unexpected catalyst for growth? There was something profound in Lisa's insights. Would they dare to redefine skepticism together? The loaded question hung in the air, the challenge lacing the moment with urgency. Sarah realized that now was the time when her own fears could become platforms for collective strength. She sensed growth encompassing her, a transformation taking root. But just as she felt fueled by newfound resolve, another reality intruded, one that demanded a confrontation not just with the outside world, but with the darkest corners of her own heart. How would she confront the unresolved doubt that continued to overshadow her journey, now that the world had pushed her to face it? The air around her thickened, and a tumult of possibilities awaited. Would she collapse under the weight of her trials, or would she emerge, emboldened, as the architect of her narrative? The crossroads loomed just ahead, and Sarah stood on the edge, ready to take the plunge. As the conversation intensified in the cafe, an electric energy enveloped Sarah. In the cacophony of shared fears and doubts, seeds of resolve were taking root. Yet, amidst the burgeoning communal strength, her own internal struggle simmered just below the surface. While others spoke of how to transform skepticism into strength, she grappled with her own silence, one that felt like a gaping chasm pulling her back into darkness. She watched as Lisa's words fueled a rallying spirit, encouraging her companions to embrace their looming uncertainties. Sarah felt an unconventional yearning to join in that ferocity, to step out of the liminal space she'd occupied for too long. The tension pulled at her, whispering that she must contribute her voice, yet a familiar dread ensconced her thoughts. What if exposing her true doubts rendered her vulnerable in ways she couldn't manage? Sarah? A voice jolted her from her reverie. It was Mark, always the thoughtful one. His eyes, filled with genuine curiosity, turned toward her. You haven't shared much today. What's on your mind? A swift wave of panic cascaded through her, pounding against her ribcage. The responsibility of articulating her own fears, the very thing she had invited others to do, felt daunting. Each heartbeat echoed her internal discourse, urging her to break the surface tension of uncertainty. Honestly, Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly, I've been thinking about the shadows of doubt that linger inside me. I talk about growth and resilience, but the specter of comparison, of judgment, those feelings also creep under my skin. I wonder if I'm authentic or simply wearing a mask. She immediately sensed a collective intake of breath. It was raw, it was open, and it was uncomfortable. Yet something in that moment felt transformative. She recognized how courageous it was to expose her hidden struggles, not as a weakness but as a testament to her reality. To her surprise, murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Others began nodding, sharing similar sentiments of fear cloaked in public appearances, bewilderment wrapped in expectations. In doing so, they began reframing their collective narrative. They were not alone in their vulnerabilities. Encouraged, Sarah pressed further into her honesty, examining the darkness that often felt insurmountable. I worry that I am not enough. That I haven't done enough to honor my son's memory. What if my efforts to help others are just a distraction from my own grief? Instantly, she felt a wave of relief mingle with dread. Had she gone too far? Was this an overshare that would fracture the moment? But Lisa shook her head gently, a beacon of understanding flashing in her eyes. No, Sarah. It's critical that we feel these doubts. They validate our journey. Embracing them is part of evolving beyond them. A sense of camaraderie spread throughout the room. Something profound had shifted. They were no longer disparate individuals grappling with their own shadows, but a collective of shared human experiences. In the warmth of this interconnectedness, Sarah's resolve began to crystallize. Her vulnerabilities were not simply burdens, perhaps they were gateways to deeper understanding, but even as clarity emerged, shadows persisted. The idea struck her that while confronting external judgments had its significance, it paled in comparison to the self-judgments she faced daily. With this realization came a new challenge. How would she rewrite the internal script that had bound her for far too long? As the discussion flowed on, a familiar restlessness stirred within her. A question emerged, demanding attention. What did it truly mean to hold oneself accountable in the face of inner turmoil? She realized this inquiry demanded a leap of faith, a willingness not just to share her thoughts, but to challenge her core beliefs about self-worth and purpose. With a newfound clarity, Sarah made her choice. She would confront those haunting voices inside her head, not with denial, but with courageous truth. Here in this shared space, she felt empowered to not just speak her mind, but to redefine her relationship with her own skepticism. Yet, even her bold intentions found themselves shadowed by an icy hand clutching at her heart. Why, after moments of growth and clarity, did the darkness rise again? The familiar whisper clawed back into her consciousness, reminding her of unresolved pain that earlier discussions had stirred. And just as it seemed she'd found the thread to unravel, a chilling thought pierced through. Was this newfound understanding enough to navigate the terrors that still echoed through her life? Or would she remain tethered to the weight of unresolved grief, perpetually seeking but never arriving? In that crucial moment, Sarah recognized she stood on the brink of a deeper discovery, fraught with tension yet rich with potential. Now, she had to decide, would she dare to peel back the layers of her most profound fears, facing the ghosts that lingered in her history? The path remained uncertain, but fortitude was slowly taking root from within. The shadows loomed, but illumination beckoned, just beyond grasp. With her heart pounding, she prepared for the confrontation that awaited. Would she break free, or would the darkness pull her back, a haunting reminder of unprocessed pain? Clarity was fleeting. The cafe, once buzzing with encouragement, now felt constricting, its walls pressing in around Sarah as she grappled with the heavy thoughts swirling like a tempest in her mind. She could sense a shift within her, anger bubbled up between the pride and fear coiling in her chest. Vulnerability had crept in, awakening long-dormant emotions, and there was no turning back. Why do I keep caging myself? She murmured, already aware that the question wasn't solely rhetorical. The cafe's warm hues didn't soften the tightness knotting her stomach as she started piecing together the disconnect between her private battles and the facade she'd constructed for the world. The voices around her faded into white noise, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of her pulse. What if the mask she wore were made of glass, reflecting only what she thought others wanted? What hidden shards of pain lurked behind these identities? Did they serve her well, or did they become shields constructed from fear? Sarah, still with us? Mark's voice was concerned, drawing her back to the present. Yeah, just rethinking some things, she replied, half-heartedly smiling as she made a mental note to hug the truth a little closer. The prospect of confronting the darkness felt as overwhelming as it was enticing. Sarah understood the power of her voice, how it had the potential to shake not only her own foundations but those around her. Each passing minute deepened her resolve. She shared her fears, but it was time to delve deeper. As the meeting progressed, inspiration ignited around her. Members of the group shared anecdotes, revealing prismatic hues of their struggles, fears, and small victories. Each story acted like fuel, allowing Sarah to envision her own narrative not merely as a story of loss, but also as one of rebirth through challenge. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, envisioning the gravesite she had visited far too often. She'd often left tokens or notes, parcels of love folded into paper, but this time, her heart demanded more than remnants of grief. This was about gathering courage to weave her narrative into the tapestry of resilience, realizing that her story had validity, a unique blend of sorrow and strength. With newfound determination, she breathed deeply. Maybe the harsh judgments she harbored weren't the only voices in her head, her truth could rise above them. The idea of authenticity danced tantalizingly at the edges of her thoughts. By living in her truth, could she not also honor her son's memory? Maybe I should write to him, she thought suddenly. Tell him everything I've held back, every weight I've tried to shoulder alone. More than a simple catharsis, this idea morphed into a promise. She envisioned sharing her letters unfiltered and raw with others, allowing them to glimpse not only her pain but also her healing journey. With this revelation came clarity. Confronting her grief was the first step toward letting go of the narrative that had kept her bound in doubt and despair. As Sarah opened her eyes, the cafe felt brighter. The shadows of her self-doubt began to slender, and she felt buoyed by resilient purpose. She was tired of seeking approval from specters of expectation and comparison. No longer would she step back into the darkness. It was time to chart her own journey. But as the discussion began to wind down, she felt the weight of unaddressed questions. Would anyone understand the full depth of her struggles? Could she cope with the possibility of rejection if her honesty met an unsupportive response? These questions haunted her as the gathering disbanded, but amidst the uncertainty, she realized a truth. Vulnerability was not just a bridge to connection, but also a profound act of authenticity that reverberated with courage. As the group began to exit the cafe, pumping up their spirits, Sarah lingered behind, grounding herself in the moment's vibrancy. Clutching her journal tightly, she understood that this was only the start. The path ahead was laden with choices that could either cement her growth or yank her back into familiar despair. With her heart drumming powerfully against her ribs, she recognized that now was the time to confront not only her grief, but the broader dimensions of her history that shaped her very existence. Could she summon forth the rawness to unravel past pain? Stepping outside, the cool evening air coated her skin, clasping her in a shivery embrace. As she took a quiet breath, ready to face whatever came next, a flicker of doubt challenged her resolve. What if she stepped too far into her truth, unearthing more than she was prepared to handle? Would the journey lead to liberation, or threaten to fracture her fragile new identity? The confrontation loomed like a storm cloud just beyond the horizon, and she had no certainty of its outcome. But Sarah felt invigorated. She was ready to break the silence once and for all, one word at a time. As Sarah stood at the precipice of her journey, she finally recognized the path forward was not merely about voicing her struggles but reclaiming her narrative. She had your potential to turn pain into purpose, strength in vulnerability, and healing through connection. The lessons learned within the cafe had ignited a fierce determination to confront her fears, to hold her grief like sacred fuel, and to melt it into a force of transformation. Days passed as she meticulously crafted her plans. The notion of confronting skepticism both within herself and without elected urgency. Sarah initiated a heartfelt letter campaign, inviting local individuals to share their own stories of loss and resilience. With each letter sent out, she found herself elated, teaching herself that the act of sharing could light the most shadowy corners of grief. The momentum built until it culminated in an event she titled Voices of Resilience. The venue was an open space in the community, where families placed their loved ones' names and memories on beautifully crafted lanterns. This wasn't just an event, it was an invitation for a community to heal together, openly discuss their grief, and dispel the silence. On the day of the event, Sarah stood at the front. A sense of ease washed over her as she took in the richness of diverse experiences filling the room. Individuals gathered, their hearts on their sleeves, and as she introduced the program, a fire ignited within her. Here, she wasn't just speaking for Ethan. She was an embodiment of myriad stories, a voice for many who had walked the same lonely path. As she stepped down from the podium, her heart swelled with pride as she witnessed moments of vulnerability mirrored in the tentatively shared voices of others, each story interlacing like strands of a vibrant tapestry. Laughter broke through tears. Shared experiences dissolved isolation, each testimony a testament to the strength found in community. In that vibrant tapestry, Sarah spotted the man who had once mocked her pain, now standing motionless, absorbed by the collective spirit. The sight struck her, filling her with a sense of empowerment. His glance was no longer an expression of ridicule, rather, it bore a glimpse of understanding. In that moment, she realized that confronting him had allowed room for growth not only for her but for everyone in the room. Including him, with lanterns glowing bright, honoring lives lost. Sarah felt a jolt of satisfaction. She had crafted not only a memory for Ethan but a gathering that had transformed the fabric of their community. It was a solid affirmation that grief did not need to be silent. Conversely, it could be the greatest catalyst for movement and connection. Weeks later, the success of Voices of Resilience became a springboard for new initiatives. Inspired by the connections made, Sarah organized small support groups, intimate spaces where others could navigate their journeys, confront doubts, and share soaring victories rooted in pain. Word spread, igniting conversations beyond her hometown. In the reflective glow of nighttime, Sarah would recall the first steps taken after visiting Ethan's grave. She had emerged from fog into clarity, from grief into purpose. Those moments shaped her a mother, a community activist, and a voice that had grown louder, stronger, and more authentic. As she gazed out at the horizon, she felt unlimited. No longer tethered by skepticism or the quiet claws of doubt, she had proven, above all, that change begins with sharing one's truth. The weight she had carried transformed into honor, the legacy of a life remembered through conviction and love. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this was her moment. She had wrestled with despair and emerged victorious. She had not just transformed herself, she was changing the world around her, one voice at a time. Your call to action is clear. You need to subscribe now to this channel, as only true champions of personal overcoming stories can appreciate what's in store. Leave a like now to help feed the algorithm and ensure these essential narratives are shared. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this powerful conclusion, because transformation deserves to resonate far and wide.